Blood was running down my temple before I even understood what had happened. My father stood over me, holding the shattered remains of my military laptop, the one that carried 18 months of top-secret work for the Pentagon. My ears rang, my vision swam, and somewhere in the background, my mother was laughing. I'm Captain Emily Carter, United States Army, and I have faced pressure on the battlefield. But nothing in my training prepared me for the enemy waiting inside my own home. That day wasn't an accident. It was the final act in a war my family had been waging against me for years. What they didn't know was that this time, I was ready to fight back. And when I did, it would cost them far more than they ever imagined. Before I take you to the moment it all began, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below and subscribe if you want to see exactly how this battle played out. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Millbrook wasn't the kind of place you saw on postcards. It was a small industrial town where the air always carried a faint metallic tang from the steel mill, and the factory whistle kept time more faithfully than any clock. Rows of squat brick houses huddled together under a sky that always seemed dusted and gray. Our two-bedroom home sat at the edge of town, its white paint peeling in long strips, revealing the tired wood underneath. My father, Harold Carter, called it having realistic priorities. To him, spending money on appearances was a waste. What mattered was working hard, keeping your head down, and not asking for more than life handed you. Dad had been a steelworker for 27 years. His hands were thick and calloused, his knuckles permanently scarred from years of gripping heavy tools. He wore his labor like armor and his scowl like a badge of honor. In his eyes, real work meant sweat, grit, and muscle. Anything else, especially work done from behind a desk, wasn't worth respecting. My mother, Doris, worked part-time at the local diner, and the rest of the time she ran the household exactly the way Dad liked it. She had learned early in their marriage that contradicting him led to days of icy silence or explosive shouting. Over the years, she stopped offering her own opinions entirely, choosing instead to echo his, like a shadow agreeing with its owner. My older brother, Frank, was the golden child. He dropped out of high school at 17 to work alongside Dad at the mill. That decision sealed his place in my father's heart forever. "That's my boy," Dad would say, clapping Frank on the shoulder at family gatherings. None of that book nonsense, just honest work. I was the odd one out from the start. While Frank was learning to handle power tools, I was mapping imaginary battlefields in my notebooks, fascinated by tactics and strategy. I loved taking things apart, not just to see how they worked, but to figure out how they could work better. In elementary school, I joined every club that involved problem solving, from chess to science fair teams. My father called them time wasters. My mother would just give a tight smile and say, "Your father's right, Emily. Don't get too wrapped up in silly things." I learned early on that enthusiasm around my family was dangerous. They didn't just fail to share it, they crushed it before it could grow. When I was in middle school, I won first place in a regional strategy simulation competition hosted by a local ROTC chapter. My prize was a small medal and a tour of a National Guard base. I was over the moon. My father barely looked up from his newspaper when I showed him the medal. "Doesn't pay the bills," he muttered. By high school, I had set my sights on the National Military Academy. Every grade, every extracurricular, every training program I joined was aimed at that goal. My instructors noticed my discipline and precision. My JROTC commander told me I had the makings of a leader. When I was accepted into the academy with a full scholarship, my father's reaction was not pride. It was suspicion. "So they're going to pay you to sit in classrooms and talk about war instead of actually fighting it?" The night I announced I would be leaving for the academy, the kitchen fell silent. My mother's fork hovered in midair. My father leaned back in his chair, narrowing his eyes. "You really think you're better than us, don't you?" He said slowly. "Better than honest work? You want to run off and play soldier while your family stays here, doing the real jobs." "It's not playing soldier," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's serving my country, just in a different way." He slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the dishes. The only way to serve is to fight. Anything else is hiding behind a desk. That was the moment I understood. No matter what I achieved, it would never be enough for him. The academy was brutal. Physically, mentally, emotionally. But it was also the first place where I felt I belonged. My instructors valued precision and foresight. My peers respected competence, not just muscle. I pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible, graduating near the top of my class and earning a placement in the Army's Strategic Analysis Division. It wasn't the front lines, but it was where wars were prevented before they started. It was where the decisions that saved lives were made. And I was good at it. Not everyone was happy to see me succeed. Staff Sergeant Miller, a seasoned analyst, made it clear he didn't think I belonged there. Book smarts don't win wars, he liked to say loud enough for the entire office to hear. I ignored him, until I realized he was dropping little comments about my easy job into conversations with people outside the base. I didn't know it then, but those whispers would find their way back to my father. 4 years into my service, I was handpicked to lead the development of a high-value strategic report, assessing the economic and military stability of Eastern Europe. The report would go directly to the Pentagon. It was the kind of assignment that could make, or break, a career. When I crunched the numbers, I realized that staying in the city near the base would drain my budget before the project was complete. Against my better judgment, I decided to rent a small room back in Millbrook. It was only temporary, I told myself. A few months to save money. I could handle it. What I didn't know was that moving back home would put me right in the middle of the most dangerous battlefield I'd ever face. When the throbbing in my skull dulled enough for me to think straight, I realized 2 things. First, the damage to my military laptop wasn't just physical. It was career-ending if I didn't act fast. Second, my father didn't break it in a fit of clumsy rage. He knew exactly what he was doing. That knowledge sat heavy in my chest like a weight pressing against my lungs. I didn't rush to the hospital. I didn't run to a neighbor. Instead, I went to my room, locked the door, and pulled out a hidden drive I kept in a hollowed-out law book on my shelf. Years in the Army had taught me to never keep all my work in one place. My father thought he had destroyed everything, but I had backups. Encrypted, mirrored, and stored where no one in this house would ever think to look. Still, the broken laptop wasn't the only problem. He'd crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. The man who was supposed to protect me had just drawn first blood in a war he thought he could win. My mother's laughter from earlier kept replaying in my head, sharp and cruel. This wasn't just his doing. She was in on it. I took stock of my surroundings the way I would in hostile territory. The creak of the hallway floorboards told me someone was outside my room. Shadows moved under the door. They weren't just waiting for me to come out. They were listening. I kept my voice low as I called a trusted contact from my Army days, a cybersecurity specialist named Mark Jensen. I didn't tell him everything, just enough for him to know I needed a secure channel. Mark's voice was calm, but I caught the edge in it when I mentioned my father's name. He knew the type. Controlling, manipulative, the kind of man who believed blood ties gave him ownership over you. "Emily, don't make your next move without covering your tracks," he said. "They'll come at you harder if they know you're fighting back." That night, I pretended to sleep. At 2 a.m., I heard my father's heavy steps outside my room again. A faint click at the doorknob told me he was testing it. I lay still, breathing evenly, and listened as he walked away. My instincts screamed that he wasn't finished, that the smashed laptop was just the opening shot. By morning, my suspicions were confirmed. The lock on my desk drawer had been tampered with. A pile of old journals had been rifled through, as if he was looking for something else to destroy. But here's what he didn't know. I had started documenting everything months ago. Every threat, every insult, every suspicious incident. It was all written down and stored in cloud servers under multiple aliases. Over breakfast, I played the role of the dutiful daughter. I didn't flinch when he made a snide comment about freeloaders who hide behind military titles. I smiled when my mother slid a plate toward me, acting as if she hadn't laughed while I bled the night before. Inside, I was memorizing every detail. The way my father's eyes lingered on the locked cabinet in the corner, the quick glance my mother gave him when she thought I wasn't looking. I knew they would try again, and when they did, I'd be ready. This wasn't going to be another screaming match that ended with me storming off. No, this time I would let them make their move, all while I set the stage for mine. Because the truth was, I had something my father couldn't destroy. A skill set honed in military intelligence, the ability to play the long game, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. 2 days after the laptop incident, the first shot in their public war against me landed. A letter arrived, not from family, not from a friend, but from a law firm in town, one that my father had used before to intimidate business partners. The envelope was thick, the paper heavy. I didn't have to open it to know it wasn't good news. Inside was a formal notice. They were contesting my ownership of a small piece of land that had been in my name since my Army deployment. It wasn't valuable in money terms, but strategically, it mattered. The property bordered one of my father's real estate developments. He wanted it. He'd probably wanted it for years. What got me wasn't the claim. It was the way they framed it. They accused me of abandoning the property, of being unfit to manage assets due to emotional instability and erratic behavior. Those weren't just legal phrases. They were character assassinations dressed in formal language, and they'd put it in writing. That same afternoon, a wave of whispers began to hit my phone. Old friends, former neighbors, people I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly concerned about me. One messaged, "Emily, your mom said you've been acting strange lately. Are you okay?" Another wrote, "I heard you're in some trouble with the Army. Hope that's not true." The realization hit me cold. They weren't just coming for my property. They were coming for my reputation. And in my world, reputation is currency. If they could make people believe I was unstable, untrustworthy, or, God forbid, a security risk, they could ruin me without firing another shot. By evening, the social damage campaign was in full swing. My father had a knack for turning people into pawns, and my mother knew exactly which buttons to push to get the community talking. Church friends stopped calling. A mentor from high school texted me saying he didn't want to be caught in the middle. The circle around me was shrinking fast. I wasn't going to let them box me in. I drafted a calm but strategic response to the law firm, citing my service record, my clean title, and my current upkeep of the property. I sent it certified mail. Paper trails mattered now. Then I reached out to a contact in the JAG Corps. If my parents wanted to make this legal, I'd bring military law into it. They'd soon learn that in my world, records are kept, witnesses are sworn, and lies have consequences. But legal maneuvering was only half the battle. The social smears required a different kind of counterattack, one that didn't look like a counterattack. I began quietly reaching out to a select group of people I trusted, sharing just enough truth for them to doubt the rumors. Not the whole story, just seeds of doubt. If my father's strategy was to isolate me, mine was to quietly rebuild a network he couldn't see coming. That night, I lay in bed replaying every step they'd taken so far. Breaking my laptop, testing my room's lock, rifling through my things. Now, using lawyers and gossip to box me in. It was textbook psychological warfare. Except I'd seen worse in active duty, and I knew something they didn't. The more desperate your opponent becomes, the sloppier their tactics get. They thought they were tightening the noose. In reality, they were giving me exactly what I needed. Documented patterns of harassment, escalation, and malicious intent. The kind of evidence that, in the right hands, could flip the entire narrative. And I already knew whose hands it would end up in. I knew I couldn't outshout my parents in the court of public opinion. They'd already spent years cultivating the image of a respectable, God-fearing family. Instead, I'd have to outthink them. Step 1 was to secure my own position. That meant protecting my assets, my records, and my career. I moved my most critical documents, both military and personal, into a safety deposit box under a different branch from the one my father used. Birth certificates, service awards, financial statements, Even the original deed to the land they were trying to claim, it all went under lock and key. Then I started building my truth file. I combed through old emails, texts, and documents, looking for patterns in their behavior. Times they'd pressured me for money, messages where they'd hinted at transferring assets into their control for the family's benefit, moments they'd undermined me in front of others. Every piece went into a digital folder, backed up in multiple places, but information was only useful if you knew how to weaponize it. That's where my Army training came in. I'd worked on operations where we gathered intel quietly, waited for the right moment, then struck with precision. My family wouldn't see me coming until it was too late. Step 2 was about perception. They wanted the community to see me as unstable? Fine. I'd give the community something else to look at. Public proof that I was disciplined, reliable, and still in full control of my life. I accepted a speaking invitation from a local veterans group. I showed up in full dress uniform, my ribbons and medals polished to a shine, and spoke for 20 minutes about service, leadership, and integrity. People filmed it, posted it online. Within hours, those videos began to circulate, drowning out some of the whispers my parents had planted. Step 3 was my quiet favorite, turning their own allies into potential liabilities. My father had a habit of keeping certain friends close, the kind who owed him favors. I reached out to one of them, a contractor I'd helped once with the military logistics project. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I simply asked about a few inconsistencies in a land deal my father had pushed through years ago. He got nervous. Nervous people talk. And if he talked, the chain reaction could expose things my parents didn't want exposed. All the while, I kept my tone calm, my moves measured. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I let them think I was licking my wounds, that I was slowly crumbling under the weight of their pressure. Let them underestimate me. It would make the final blow land harder. Privately, though, the tension was eating at me. Every time I checked my phone, I half expected another smear, another legal notice, another betrayal from someone I thought I could trust. But under that tension was a steady burn of focus. They'd taken my trust, my peace, my work. But I still had my mind, my training, and a truth they couldn't bury forever. I reminded myself of something an old commander once told me. A battle isn't won when you land the first strike. It's won when your enemy realizes too late that you've been shaping the fight from the start. That's exactly what I was doing now. By the end of that week, my truth file had doubled in size. My network was quietly strengthening. And without my parents realizing it, they'd walked right into a pattern of escalation that could look to the right investigators, like harassment, intimidation, and potentially even fraud. I wasn't ready to drop the hammer yet, but the pieces were moving into place. And once they locked into position, there would be no undoing the damage. For them. It was late, nearly midnight, when I finally closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. My apartment was silent, save for the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen. The glow from the screen lit up the piles of files around me, each one a piece of the puzzle I'd been building for weeks. That's when I saw it. Buried in an old email thread between my father and one of his business partners was a single PDF attachment, a scanned contract from 7 years ago. At first, I skimmed over it, thinking it was just another property lease. But then the signatures caught my eye. My father's, and mine. Only I had never signed that document. The signature was close, but not mine. Slightly off an angle, the loop in the Y of my last name too long. And there, right above my signature, was a clause transferring part of my military pension benefits to a family trust, managed by my father. I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. If this was what it looked like, it wasn't just betrayal. It was forgery. And forgery, especially involving federal benefits, was a federal crime. I read the document 3 more times, my pulse steadying with each pass. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was criminal. And now I had proof. Suddenly, the weight I'd been carrying shifted. I wasn't on the defensive anymore. I was holding the kind of evidence that could flip the power dynamic entirely. In my mind, I could already see the chain reaction. With this document, I could go to the military's legal branch, the Inspector General's office, or even the Department of Justice. My father's carefully crafted public image would shatter. The respectable family man would become the subject of a federal investigation. And that wasn't all. This paper trail could be the keystone in connecting years of questionable transactions, property disputes, and intimidation tactics. It wasn't just about getting justice. It was about exposing the entire system they'd built to control me. The realization hit me so hard I laughed. Quietly at first, then sharper, almost bitter. They thought breaking my laptop had destroyed me. But in their arrogance, they'd left a piece of their own undoing sitting in a forgotten email attachment. I remembered my mother's laugh that day, the sound of glass and plastic shattering under my father's hands. They believed they had erased 18 months of my work, silenced my voice, and stripped away my defenses. What they didn't know was that all they'd done was make me look harder. And in looking harder, I'd found their fatal mistake. From that moment on, my mindset shifted. I was no longer reacting to their attacks. I was engineering their downfall. I carefully duplicated the file onto 3 separate encrypted drives, stored one in my safety deposit box, and sent another to a trusted contact in the Army JAG Corps with the subject line: "Need your eyes on this. Possible fraud involving federal benefits." Then I sat back, letting the adrenaline course through me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in complete control. The fear was still there, but it had transformed. No longer a chain holding me down, but a fire pushing me forward. I knew they'd fight back once they realized what I had. But it wouldn't matter. The war they'd started in the shadows was about to be dragged into the light. And this time, I was the one choosing the battlefield. I didn't go straight to the lawyers. That's what they expected me to do. Instead, I went to the one place they never thought I'd set foot in again: the old county records office. It smelled like dust and history, the kind of place you could get lost in if you didn't know what you were looking for. I did. I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for leverage. For years, my father had been meticulous about hiding his tracks: offshore accounts, fake names, silent partnerships. But I knew something he didn't. Back when I was still the dutiful daughter, he'd once bragged, half drunk, about a property deed he kept under a dummy corporation. He thought it was the smartest move he'd ever made. What he didn't know was that, as a military finance officer, I'd memorized the registration pattern in seconds. So I dug, for hours. My fingers were numb from flipping through brittle pages. My eyes burned from squinting at microfilm screens. But when I found it, God, the rush was almost addictive. There it was, a land purchase tied to a shell company, linked to a trust fund, in my mother's name. My lips curled into a smile. This wasn't just money. This was motive. If they'd been willing to smash my laptop and try to ruin my career over the risk of exposure, imagine what they'd do if I threatened this. I scanned every page, uploaded the files to an encrypted drive, and sent one copy to a secure contact in DC. If anything happened to me, these documents would land on the desk of someone with far more power than my family. When I walked out of that building, the late afternoon sun felt different. Sharper, hotter, like the air itself was holding its breath. I knew I'd just shifted the balance. The war was no longer about survival. Now it was about who would land the first killing blow. That evening, I made my move. I didn't confront them directly. No screaming matches, no accusations. I simply sent my father a single text. "I know about Hawthorne Holdings. We should talk." It was surgical, short enough to keep him guessing, sharp enough to pierce through his calm facade. Within minutes, my phone lit up with call after call. I didn't answer. I wanted him to stew. By midnight, I'd received 3 messages from extended family members who hadn't spoken to me in years. Clearly, the panic had started to spread. That was the beauty of it. One small drop of information in the right place, and the ripples would reach every corner of their carefully constructed image. But the real satisfaction came the next morning, when a black SUV idled in front of my apartment building. A man in a suit got out, one of my father's fixers. He didn't say hello, didn't smile, just handed me a sealed envelope and walked away. Inside was a short note in my father's handwriting. Name your price. I laughed, quietly, bitterly. They still thought this was about money. They had no idea I was about to take something far more valuable from them. And as I set the note down, I felt it for the first time since this war began. Control. I didn't respond to my father's note. Not right away. Silence is a weapon most people underestimate, and I'd learned in military strategy that sometimes the absence of movement creates more fear than a direct attack. For the next 3 days, I let them think I was rattled. I stopped answering messages. I accidentally left my blinds open so that anyone watching from the street could see me pacing, scribbling notes, making phone calls. I knew they had eyes on me. My father never operated without surveillance. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, I was building a narrative. To them, it had to look like I was scrambling, unsure, maybe even desperate to cut a deal. But in reality, every step I took was calculated to feed their arrogance. On the 4th day, I finally called my mother. Her voice dripped with false concern. "Emily, sweetheart, your father's worried. We just want to clear this up before things get complicated." I almost laughed. Complicated in my mother's language meant before we can't control it anymore. I lowered my voice, added a tremor. "I don't know what to do. I can't fight you two. Not with what you have." There was a pause. I could almost hear the smile forming on her lips. "Then don't fight, darling. Let's sit down and work something out." Exactly what I wanted. If they believed I was on the verge of surrender, they'd bring their guard down. That night, I sent my father an email. Not with demands, but with a proposal. I suggested meeting at a neutral location, a small private club downtown. I'd consider handing over what I knew in exchange for a modest payout and a promise to leave my career alone. I made it look pathetic on purpose. 2 hours later, his reply came, "Be at the club Friday, 8 p.m. Bring everything." Perfect. What they didn't know was that I'd already secured the club's cooperation. The owner, an old friend from my officer training days, agreed to let me set up discreet audio and video feeds in the private lounge. Every word, every threat, every slip of information they gave me would be recorded in crystal clarity. Friday arrived, and I dressed the part. Plain clothes, minimal makeup, just enough to look tired and beaten down. When I walked in, my father was already there, drink in hand, my mother sitting beside him with that predatory calm she'd perfected over decades. "Emily," my father said, leaning back like a king addressing a servant. "Let's end this nonsense." I slid into the chair opposite them, keeping my gaze low. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but because I wanted them to see it. "I brought copies," I whispered, sliding a thin folder across the table. "But the originals, they're somewhere safe. I need assurance before I give them up." He smirked, flipping through the pages, select documents I'd chosen to show him. Enough to confirm I knew about Hawthorne Holdings, but not enough to do real damage. The real files, the ones that could bury them, were locked away under multiple layers of security. My mother leaned in. "And what assurance do you want, dear?" I hesitated, then said the one thing I knew would make them believe I was in retreat. "Just stop trying to destroy my career. Let me walk away clean." It was almost too easy. My father reached for his pen, ready to scribble a so-called agreement on the spot. That was when he slipped, mentioning another property, another shell company. It was quick, a throwaway comment meant to intimidate me, but it was on record now. An hour later, we left separately. They thought they'd handled me. What they didn't realize was that they'd just confirmed a second target and given me everything I needed to dismantle their empire from the inside out. Walking back to my car, I felt the same rush I used to get before a military op. Calm, focused, with the knowledge that the trap had closed, and my opponents didn't even know it yet. The following Monday, I moved quietly, almost invisibly, just enough for them to think I'd faded back into my corner. But every step I took was deliberate, aimed to destabilize them without revealing my hand. I started with Hawthorne Holdings, the crown jewel of their shadow empire. I knew from years of bookkeeping and trust management that it relied heavily on a particular network of shell corporations. If even one domino fell, the ripple could send investors running. I didn't go for the obvious. No flashy accusations, no dramatic announcements. Instead, I made a phone call to an old contact, Lisa Tran, a meticulous investigative auditor with a reputation for quiet but devastating work. Lisa didn't work for free, but she owed me. Back when she'd been blacklisted from a major firm due to a false allegation, I'd slipped her the evidence to clear her name. She never forgot. "Emily," she said over the phone, "if I take this, it stays off the record until you say otherwise." "Exactly," I told her. "I need them shaken, not destroyed. Yet." Within 48 hours, Lisa sent an anonymous compliance query to one of Hawthorne Holdings' partner banks, requesting verification on certain overseas transfers. She didn't name my parents directly, but the mere mention of those accounts was enough to trigger an internal review. By Wednesday, the first tremors began. I knew because my mother called. Not with her usual cold formality, but with an edge I hadn't heard in years. "Emily, have you spoken to anyone at North Point Bank?" "No," I said lightly. "Why?" "Because there's a— Never mind. Just stay out of it." She hung up before I could ask anything else. Perfect. That same day, I dropped the second seed. This one was for my father. I mailed him an unmarked envelope with a single photograph inside. Him, leaving a discreet meeting with a man known in the industry for laundering money through real estate. The photo was from 5 years ago, taken by a military surveillance contact during an unrelated op. I'd kept it buried, knowing one day it might be useful. On the back of the photo, in neat block letters, I wrote, "Loose ends have a way of unraveling." No signature. No return address. I knew he'd recognize my style. Controlled, surgical, impossible to trace back. That was the point. The paranoia alone would eat at him. By Friday, cracks were visible. I spotted my father outside the club we'd met at the previous week, speaking to one of his fixers in a tone that was far too harsh for a public setting. My mother looked more distracted than usual at her charity luncheon, making small but noticeable errors in her speeches. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Late that night, I received an encrypted message from an unknown source. When I decrypted it, a familiar name popped up. Daniel Foster, my father's longtime legal shark. The message was short. "We need to talk. Off the record. I think I'm on the wrong side of this." That was it. No details, no demands. Just the first defection from their camp. And I knew why. The compliance query Lisa had initiated wasn't just making my parents nervous. It was forcing people around them to think about self-preservation. No one wanted to go down with the sinking ship. I agreed to meet Daniel in a small corner booth of a diner outside the city. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. Dark circles under his eyes. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Emily, I've worked for your father for 20 years. I know where the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking. But he's slipping. He's making mistakes. And when the fallout comes, I'm not going to prison for him." I sipped my coffee, pretending to consider his words. "What are you offering?" "Names, accounts, dates, everything you need to bring him down. But I want immunity before I hand it over." I didn't commit. Not yet. The smartest way to handle someone like Daniel was to keep him talking, feeding me pieces without realizing how much he'd already given away. By the time I left that diner, I had confirmation of 3 more shell companies, a list of their top 5 friendly contractors, and a name I hadn't heard in years. A man tied to a government procurement scandal that had mysteriously vanished from the headlines. Driving back through the empty streets, I felt that familiar hum of control. The kind you get when you know your opponent is starting to sweat, to second-guess every move, to look over their shoulder for shadows that are already there. The first blow had landed. And the best part? They still didn't know where it came from. By the start of the next week, the Hawthorne house wasn't just under strain, it was fracturing. I didn't have to guess. I could see it in their movements, in the way they no longer presented that flawless, united front. The first public crack came at a shareholders' brunch, a meticulously staged event my mother had hosted every year to maintain the illusion of stability and grace. I didn't attend, of course. I didn't need to. The whispers reached me within an hour. Apparently, my father had stepped away from the table 3 times to take urgent calls. On the 3rd time, my mother followed him out. Witnesses said their voices rose sharp and fast, far from the soft, polite tones they usually maintained in public. A photographer caught a blurred image of my mother's hand gripping his arm too tightly, her knuckles pale. It wasn't long before that image made its way to a niche financial gossip blog. The caption read, "Are the Hawthorns slipping? Trouble behind the perfect image." I couldn't have planned it better if I tried, but I had planned the next part. Using the information Daniel Foster had provided, I quietly arranged for an investigative journalist I trusted enough to accidentally receive a packet of documents. Nothing that could be directly traced to me, but enough to point toward irregularities in Hawthorne Holdings' overseas real estate investments. The story wouldn't be published immediately. Good journalists verify before they print. But the mere process of her making inquiries would send ripples through my parents' network. Those ripples, I knew, would hit shore fast. And they did. 2 days later, my brother Jonathan showed up at my apartment. I hadn't seen him in over a year, and the last time he'd been smug, self-assured, certain that siding with our parents was the only path worth taking. Now, he looked unsettled. "Emily, what the hell is going on? Dad's screaming at everyone, Mom's snapping at the staff. They think you're—" "Think I'm what?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "That you're behind some of this. The bank thing. The questions from the press. Are you?" I didn't answer directly. Instead, I let silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. His eyes flickered. Hesitation, fear, maybe even a sliver of guilt. "Jonathan," I said softly, "if they're falling apart because of a few questions, maybe it's not me they should be worried about. Maybe it's themselves." He didn't reply, but he didn't defend them either. That told me everything I needed to know. That night, I turned the pressure up one more notch. I made a discreet call to a procurement officer at one of their key government contractors, an officer who still owed me a favor from my Army finance days. I didn't give him direct orders. I simply asked whether he'd looked into all of Hawthorne Holdings' supply chain documentation. By morning, my father had received a courtesy notice that a routine audit might be expanded to include certain subcontractors. It was nothing formal yet, but it was enough to light a fire under him. From there, the dominoes began falling faster than I'd anticipated. My father called an emergency meeting with his inner circle, but several key advisors didn't show, citing other obligations. My mother canceled 2 charity appearances, a move so out of character that it made society columns speculate about her health. Even Jonathan began avoiding their calls, telling mutual contacts he needed space. The beauty of it all was that I wasn't the one delivering the killing blows. I was just removing the supports, one by one, and letting gravity do the rest. The real turning point came at a board meeting for Hawthorne Holdings. I wasn't there, but I got the transcript from an insider within hours. The meeting started normally enough, but when one board member cautiously suggested pausing certain projects until the compliance queries were resolved, my father exploded. He accused half the room of disloyalty, slammed a folder on the table, and stormed out. My mother tried to smooth it over, but the damage was done. The board voted to bring in an independent oversight consultant. That was their nightmare. An outsider with the authority to dig through everything. And as I read the transcript, I realized the sweetest part. I hadn't even needed to name myself as their enemy. Their own fear had done that for me. By the time I closed my laptop that night, I knew the next phase was ready. They weren't just destabilized, they were primed for collapse. Now it was only a matter of deciding when to deliver the final blow. I didn't have to wait long to see the cracks split wide open. By the time summer rolled in, the whispers that had been circling in private dinners were spilling into the open like dirty water. My father, once the man who could charm a boardroom into silence, was now snapping at my mother in front of neighbors, family friends, and even their precious donors. The first time it happened, I was standing near the refreshment table at a community fundraiser, pretending to be busy scrolling through my phone. The ballroom was lit in warm gold, champagne glasses clinking, and every guest wearing that polished fake smile you could spot a mile away. My father was speaking to Senator Whitmore when my mother interrupted, demanding to know why he had moved certain funds without consulting her. Her voice wasn't raised at first, but the way the air shifted told me everyone nearby had heard. My father's jaw tightened. The senator awkwardly excused himself, and in a voice sharp enough to cut glass, my father snapped, "Because if I asked you, it would take 6 weeks and a committee to get anything done." Gasps rippled through the room. My mother's cheeks flushed crimson, not from embarrassment, but from pure rage. She took a step closer, her voice rising. "Or maybe because you didn't want me to see where the money was really going." That was it. The first shot in what would become open warfare. People pretended to keep chatting, but every ear was tuned in. I stood there, watching the two of them rip into each other, 100 eyes darting between them, pretending not to stare. For years, they'd fought behind closed doors, keeping up the perfect facade for the world. Now, the cracks were so wide they couldn't be hidden anymore. It didn't stop there. At the next board meeting for the family foundation, my father openly accused my mother of mishandling a project budget. She fired back with a venom-laced reminder of his little offshore accounts. The room fell silent except for the sound of someone's pen clicking nervously. Jonathan, my golden boy brother, tried to smooth things over, but only made it worse by clearly siding with my father. I sat at the far end of the table, taking notes. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted to remember every single word for later. Every accusation, every slip, every name they dragged into their mess was another brick in the wall I was building around them. It was surreal, watching them destroy themselves. For so long, they had treated me as the problem, the disgrace, the one who couldn't be trusted. Now, their own greed and arrogance were eating them alive. And the best part? They didn't even notice I was there, quietly witnessing the implosion. What they also didn't know was that some of the misplaced funds and suspicious transactions they were accusing each other of weren't accidents. I had left just enough breadcrumbs in the right places, knowing that their paranoia would do the rest. The public fights became more frequent. Church luncheons, charity auctions, family dinners. Nothing was off limits. People stopped seeing them as the powerful, untouchable Carters and started whispering about how unstable they'd become. I caught wind of board members reconsidering their loyalty. A few even reached out to me privately, testing the waters, trying to see where I stood. I never revealed my hand. Not yet. I just listened, nodding in the right places, making mental notes of who was ready to jump ship. There was a kind of satisfaction in letting them burn their own bridges while I stood quietly on the shore. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was the slow collapse of an empire. And I was going to make sure the whole world saw it happen. I knew the fights were getting them nowhere. They were too blinded by ego to see the bigger picture, or to notice the quiet moves I was making. That was the beauty of it. While they were busy tearing each other apart in front of half the city, I was slipping legal knives between the cracks in their armor. It started with a single envelope. Thick, white, and official-looking, it was hand-delivered to the family estate on a rainy Tuesday morning. My father thought it was another donor contract. My mother thought it was a property tax notice. They were both wrong. It was a notice of discovery, a formal legal request for financial records signed by my attorney. The grounds? A breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of trust assets. Both terms my parents hated because they knew exactly what they meant. I was calling them out. When they realized the request came from me, the reaction was immediate and volcanic. My phone blew up. First my father, then my mother, then Jonathan, each leaving progressively angrier voicemails. "Emily, what the hell are you doing?" My father barked in the first one. "This is family business. You don't sick lawyers on your own blood," my mother hissed in the second. Jonathan's was the most desperate, pretending to be calm but with that thin edge of panic. "We can handle this quietly, Em. Don't make this bigger than it has to be." I didn't return a single call. Instead, I made sure copies of the notice were sent not just to them, but to the Family Foundation Board and the state attorney's office. It wasn't just about forcing their hand, it was about letting them know they were now under a spotlight they couldn't control. The next week, my father stormed into my apartment. No call, no warning, just a pounding at the door that could have cracked the frame. When I opened it, he was soaked from the rain, eyes blazing, fists clenched. "You think you can embarrass me? You think you can drag my name through the mud?" He snarled, stepping inside like he owned the place. I didn't flinch. "I'm not dragging your name anywhere, Dad. The paper trail does that for me." His jaw flexed. "You have no idea what you're playing with." I tilted my head. "Actually, I do. I was the one who built half those systems. I know exactly where the holes are. And I know exactly where you've been hiding the money." For a second, I thought he might actually hit me. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. But instead of exploding, he turned on his heel and left, slamming the door so hard my picture frames rattled. The legal process moved quickly after that. My attorney filed motions for account freezes, pending review. That meant some of their pet projects, the luxury renovations, the consulting fees to friends, the overseas wire transfers, were suddenly under scrutiny. And then came the audit. A polite but relentless team of forensic accountants began combing through every transaction in the family trust. They didn't care about family politics. They cared about numbers, and the numbers weren't lining up. The fights at home reached a fever pitch. I heard from a cousin that my father had accused my mother of tipping me off about the accounts. My mother, in turn, accused Jonathan of giving me insider information. The truth? I didn't need either of them. I'd been quietly collecting evidence for years, tucking away copies of suspicious ledgers, unsigned checks, and consulting invoices that looked more like bribes. The tension started spilling into the public eye. A local business paper caught wind of internal disputes within the Carter Foundation. A journalist reached out to me for comment. I didn't confirm anything, but I didn't deny it either. Just a quiet, "No comment at this time," which was more than enough to keep the rumor mill churning. By the end of the month, their carefully crafted image of unity was in shreds. Donors started pulling out. The board began to panic. And through it all, I stayed silent, watching them twist in the wind, each wondering if the other was the one feeding me information. They wanted to erase me from the family. They wanted me forgotten, powerless. But now, every move they made, every angry word, every desperate phone call, they were all dancing to my tune. And I wasn't anywhere near finished. It was supposed to be a celebration. The Carter Foundation's annual charity gala was always the jewel in my parents' crown. Hundreds of guests, high-profile donors, local officials, and media coverage that made them look untouchable. Even after the legal notice, the audits, and the whispers in the press, they pushed ahead, convinced they could stage a perfect evening and reclaim control of the narrative. They didn't know I had no intention of letting that happen. The night was crisp, the kind where the city lights seemed sharper, more focused. I arrived alone in a simple black dress that was elegant but unassuming. No one expected me to be there. I'd been absent from these events for years, and they'd made it clear I wasn't welcome. But my name was still on the original guest list, grandfathered in from the early days, and I knew the event coordinator well enough to walk right in. The ballroom was a glittering ocean of gowns and tuxedos. Crystal chandeliers threw light across tables stacked with champagne flutes. A live string quartet played softly in the corner. On the surface, it was flawless. But under that polish, I could see the cracks, the forced smiles, the anxious glances between my parents, the way Jonathan kept checking his phone. I didn't approach them. Not yet. Instead, I mingled, drifting from group to group, quietly sowing seeds. A whispered comment here, a pointed question there. Have you seen the latest news about the audit? Or, I heard the state attorney's office has taken an interest in the foundation's finances. I didn't need to name names. I just needed to remind people that the Carter's house wasn't as stable as it looked. Then came the speech. My father took the stage first, all practiced charm and deep-voiced authority. He thanked the donors, praised the foundation's unwavering commitment to transparency, and talked about the bright future they were building. My mother stood beside him, smiling just enough to look supportive, but not so much that her cheeks ached. Jonathan was in the front row, clapping on cue. And then the interruption happened. It wasn't me, at least not directly. It was the head of the foundation's audit committee, a man known for his impeccable integrity and zero tolerance for dishonesty. He rose from his seat in the middle of the speech, walked calmly to the front, and handed my father a thick sealed envelope. The room went silent. My father tried to keep going, pretending it was nothing, but the tension was electric. Cameras flashed. People leaned forward. Someone in the back whispered, "What's that?" And someone else replied, "Looks like a legal notice." I stayed where I was, sipping champagne. When my father finally opened the envelope, his face drained of color. The documents inside were formal charges, filed that morning, alleging gross mismanagement of funds and seeking a temporary suspension of the Carter Foundation's operations pending investigation. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was almost musical. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mother stepped forward to take over, but her voice wavered. "This is a misunderstanding," she began, but the murmur of the crowd drowned her out. People were already pulling out their phones, texting, recording, whispering. And then Jonathan made the mistake of standing up and pointing at me. "This is her. She's behind all of this," he shouted, his voice cracking. Every head in the room turned toward me. I didn't flinch. I didn't even set down my glass. I just met his gaze and smiled. A small, knowing smile that said exactly what I wanted it to. "You're right. And you can't touch me." Security didn't escort me out. They didn't dare. I hadn't broken any rules, but the damage was done. By the end of the night, 3 major donors had walked out. The local news was running live coverage of the charity gala scandal. And my parents, who had built their lives on controlling every detail of their image, were suddenly the story they couldn't spin. When I left, I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. They knew I'd been there. They knew I'd seen the moment their empire cracked in half. And they knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The morning after the gala, the city was buzzing. Every local paper, every online news outlet, every talk show was covering the Carter Foundation scandal. Photos from the night. My father frozen mid-speech, my mother's pale face, Jonathan's finger stabbing the air toward me, were plastered everywhere. Even people outside the city were calling to say they'd seen it on the national news. By 8 a.m., the damage was already irreversible. The state attorney's office issued a formal press statement confirming the investigation, citing credible evidence of fund misappropriation and patterns of systemic abuse of charitable assets. They didn't mention my name, but the timing was enough for anyone paying attention to connect the dots. Jonathan tried to go on the offensive. He called mutual friends, colleagues, even old family connections, trying to paint me as some bitter outsider with a vendetta. But the more he talked, the more desperate he sounded. And the more people dug into the foundation's records, the less credible his defense became. My father's business partners began backing away. Contracts that had been in negotiation for months suddenly went cold. One partner outright told him, "I can't afford to have my name tied to yours right now." My mother's social calendar emptied overnight. Luncheons were rescheduled, charity committees restructured. In the world they had fought so hard to dominate, silence was the kiss of death. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post a single thing online. I let the evidence and the silence speak for me. 3 days later, the board of the Carter Foundation held an emergency meeting. I wasn't there, but I didn't have to be. I had a friend in the room, someone who'd once been just another board member, but who'd quietly reached out to me months ago when the first cracks started showing. They told me everything. It was brutal. The audit report was read aloud in full. Pages of documented discrepancies, missing invoices, personal expenses disguised as charitable initiatives. My father tried to shift the blame onto the accounting team. My mother claimed ignorance. Jonathan argued that every organization has gray areas and accused the board of overreacting. But the mood in the room was different now. These people weren't defending them anymore. They were protecting themselves. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. The board moved to suspend all three of them from any operational role, pending the outcome of the investigation. My father's name was to be removed from the official letterhead, my mother's role as community liaison dissolved, Jonathan's position as youth outreach director terminated. The very empire they had built on control had turned on them. That night, my father called me. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in months. "You think this is a win for you?" he said, his tone low, almost dangerous. "All you've done is burn the house down. There's nothing left for you either." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then I said, "Maybe I don't want the house. Maybe I just wanted the fire." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, and then the line went dead. It was strange how quickly everything shifted. For years, I had been the one on the outside, the one without a voice, without power. But now they were the ones scrambling for scraps, their reputations in tatters, their influence evaporating day by day. And me? I wasn't just standing. I was standing taller than I ever had before. By the end of the week, donors began reaching out to me directly, some to apologize, others to say they wanted to work with me instead. They'd seen the way I handled myself, calm, precise, without theatrics. They knew I wasn't reckless, I was deliberate. And deep down, my family knew it too. That's what scared them the most. Because if I could dismantle their power this completely without even raising my voice, they had to wonder, what else was I capable of? The day of the ceremony arrived, and Washington, D.C. was bathed in a crisp autumn light, the kind that made the marble steps of the Capitol gleam like they'd been polished, just for this moment. My dress blues fit perfectly. Tailored, precise, each ribbon and metal polished until they caught the morning sun. My hair was neatly pinned, not a strand out of place. I wasn't just showing up to be honored. I was showing up as the woman they had spent years trying to break. And I was standing taller than ever. As I stepped out of the black SUV, cameras flashed. Military officials, journalists, and dignitaries lined the path toward the Grand Hall. My name echoed in the air. Captain Emily Carter. And for a brief second, I closed my eyes and let the sound sink in. That name was no longer followed by whispers or doubt. It was spoken with respect, pride. Somewhere beyond the crowd, I caught sight of them. My father, my mother, and my brother standing off to the side. No seats reserved. No one rushing to greet them. They were just part of the onlookers now. Strangers in a place they once believed they owned. My father looked older, the lines in his face carved deeper, his posture not quite as proud. My mother's smile was brittle, her eyes scanning the scene like she was searching for a way to rewrite the narrative. My brother avoided my gaze entirely. The organizers ushered me inside, past security, into the front row. My seat had a perfect view of the stage and the crowd, including them standing awkwardly in the back. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. For years, they had made me feel small in my own home, but today they were the ones pushed to the margins. The program began with speeches from decorated generals, followed by a video montage of my unit's work. Missions completed, crises resolved, lives saved. Footage rolled of me in the field, helmet on, dirt smeared across my face, giving orders in a war zone. The audience erupted into applause, and I could almost feel the heat of my mother's silent fury from across the room. Then came the moment. My name was called. I walked to the podium as the applause swelled again, shaking hands with the commanding general who pinned the Distinguished Service Medal to my chest. His words rang through the hall. Captain Carter exemplifies courage, intelligence, and an unshakable commitment to her mission. She serves as a reminder that integrity will always outlast betrayal. The last line was deliberate. I knew it. He knew it. And judging by the way my father's jaw tightened, he knew it too. Standing at that podium, I looked out over the crowd. I could have looked at the generals, the dignitaries, the cameras. But my eyes found them instead, my family. And I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. When the ceremony concluded, people lined up to shake my hand. Photographers captured every angle, journalists asked for interviews, and officials invited me to speak at future events. My family stayed in the shadows, unacknowledged, until eventually they slipped out the side door. Walking out of that hall, I realized this was the real victory. Not the medal, not the applause, but the fact that I no longer needed them to see my worth. Everyone else already did. The medal still felt heavy on my chest as I stepped outside, the evening air cool against my skin. The applause from inside still echoed faintly in my ears, a reminder that for the first time in years, people were clapping for me. Not out of politeness, not because they had to, but because they understood what I had endured and achieved. I didn't expect to see them waiting. My father, standing stiff like the years hadn't aged him a bit. My mother beside him with her arms crossed, and my brother leaning against the wall like he was bored. For a moment, no one spoke, just the wind between us. My father broke the silence first. Emily, we should talk. His voice was quieter than I remembered, stripped of the arrogance that used to fill every word. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of his past insults. I felt nothing. About what? How you tried to ruin me? How you smashed the one thing I needed to finish my mission? Or how you stood there when they dragged my name through the mud? He shifted, searching for words. We didn't know it would go that far. I let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. You knew exactly what you were doing. And it cost you. You don't have access to my accounts, my trust, or my life anymore. That's your burden to live with. My mother tried to speak, but I cut her off. Save it. This medal, I touched it lightly, isn't just for me. It's for every soldier who's been betrayed by the people they trusted most. I fought battles overseas, but the hardest fight I ever faced was right here, with my own family. They had nothing left to say. My father's shoulders sagged just a little. My mother looked away, and my brother stared at the ground. I turned, walking toward the waiting car, each step lighter than the last. As the door closed behind me, I looked straight into the camera the crew had set up for my final interview. If you're watching this, I said, my voice steady, remember, sometimes the war you fight at home is the one that defines you. And if the people who should stand beside you turn against you, stand taller. They might take your comfort, but they can't take your courage. Unless you give it to them. I gave a small smile. Now, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, subscribe and turn on that bell. Because trust me, the next one will shake you. The car pulled away, the city lights reflecting off my medal, and in that moment, I knew I had already won, long before they even realized the war was over. That's the thing about family. They can be the people who lift you up, or the ones who try to bury you. Mine chose the second option. They thought taking away my support, my name, and my honor would destroy me. But what they didn't understand is that I had already learned how to fight wars most people couldn't even see. I rebuilt my name, earned my recognition, and walked back into that hall carrying the Medal of Honor. Not for them, but for me. And now, they have to live with the reality that the daughter they once mocked is the same woman the nation now celebrates. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or pushed aside, remember this. Your comeback can be louder than their betrayal. Make it so loud they can't ignore you. This is Hidden Family Revenge Stories, where the truth comes out, the tables turn, And justice hits harder than anyone expects. If you felt this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next one. Because trust me, the next story might just be your favorite yet.